Lijep pozdrav u još jednom UNIDU Interviewu. Ovog puta u studiju nam se pridružila podtajnica Ujedinjenih naroda za globalne komunikacije Melissa Fleming, te ćemo ovaj razgovor voditi na engleskom jeziku. Under Secretary General Fleming, we are honored to have you here today to talk with you about the UN, your job and the role you have. Welcome to Dubrovnik and to our studio.
It's really great to be here with you.
The UN this year celebrates its 80th anniversary. What do you think the UN means to today's generation of students, and what should it mean?
Well, I think it depends on where in the world you are a young person. If you're a young person in the theater of war, you're looking to the UN to try to bring about peace, to help bring you food and medicine so that you can survive. If you're a young person who's like here in Croatia, maybe whose parents or grandparents went through war, maybe you're hoping that the UN will help prevent it from ever happening again in this country. But I think what the UN stands for, and what we're trying to remind people of in our 80th year, is for the rights and the dignity of every human being. This is enshrined in the UN Charter, and I think it's a principle that young people believe in maybe more than older people when they start getting hardened in their ways. Young people believe that everyone has the right to live in dignity, that everyone has the right to express themselves and to be who they are, and to be, free to develop in the way that they want to go. So we'll fight for you. This is what the UN stands for. Human rights, human dignity, and also peace.
Maybe some young people think that international organizations are slow or distant from their problems. How can you convince them that multilateralism still matters?
Well, I think a little bit through education, because obviously we can't offer a quick fix for very complex problems in a geopolitical environment that is also very polarized. But I do think we can show examples and tell stories of why most of our problems cannot be solved in isolation. I do think young people care more than anyone else about our environment, for example. They care that climate change is destroying it and that they had nothing to do with it, and they feel they're demanding action. Well, the United Nations is probably the loudest, most consistent voice out there, advocating for climate action, advocating for an end to the dependence on fossil fuels, and full speed ahead towards renewable, clean energy. There are many obstacles in our way, and we're building coalitions with young people, pulling together in convenings and summits and COP meetings to really put the pressure on so policymakers will make the change so that future generations will have a healthy planet to live on.
You lead communications at the UN, and more people get their news from social media, which can often be toxic, filled with hate, disinformation, and AI-generated content. How do you at the UN handle the flood of disinformation?
It's a huge challenge. I mean, I've been doing communications for, I think, something like 30 years. I have never been in a more challenging communications environment than the one that we are in now, because social media is the main source of information for most people, and it is toxic. It is full of pollutants in the form of disinformation and hate speech. The algorithms are designed to amplify outrage. It's very difficult to compete when you are a fact-based institution in this algorithmic biased platform. So it's like a constant information war where the truth is trying to do battle with lies, and so it is hard. I do think that we've found a number of strategies and ways, and we have a whole set of advocacy tools that we're using to create a vision and also to make demands for a healthy information ecosystem. Because if we don't have a healthy information environment, it's very much like our natural environment. We cannot have stable societies. We cannot have trust in institutions, in elections, in democracy. And so we really need to collectively work hard on the information environment that we're in. So I'm very glad that here at the University of Dubrovnik, you have such a strong course in journalism, because this is one of the pillars of a healthy information ecosystem, a strong journalistic pillar where people can get news and information from a fact-based source of information that they can rely on.
You said you have been in communications for the last 30 years. My question is, I'm wondering, I'm curious about what motivated you to get involved in the field of international organizations and global communications?
Well, I actually started in journalism, and then I was very interested in international affairs, and I felt that it was really fascinating to be able to work within an international organization, but also I saw that they really needed help in communicating what it was that they stand for and what it was that they're doing. So it fascinated me to turn my education in journalism into working for organizations that I believed in, whose missions I thought were very important, and where I could play a role in helping people, to understand what these organizations were trying to do, and in doing so, actually make their missions more effective.
For 10 years, you worked for UNHCR. How did your experience with refugee crisis shape your approach to communications today?
It shaped it in a very important way. There's this saying that statistics are human beings with the tears dried off. So I often was communicating huge numbers, millions of refugees forcibly displaced in our world today, or thousands have just fled across this border, millions in need. And what I found, and then I started looking at communication science and behavioral science, is that people, it's human nature to actually go numb when faced with large numbers. In fact, there is a behavioral scientist, Paul Slovic, who has concluded from his experiments that the more who die, the less we care. And from all of what I studied and learned and experimented with, the most effective way to communicate, if your desire is to help people feel compassion and to get people to want to help, is to communicate individual stories. And that has been what I've been trying to do with the bold statistics, to humanize the statistics and bring out those amazing human stories that always exist in people who are forced to flee.
That leads me to my next question. You met numerous refugees and people in need and heard their hard life stories. You also published a book, I Hope More Powerful Than the Sea, where you shared the life story of a Syrian refugee who survived a shipwreck on Mediterranean on her way to Europe. How do you decide which story, individual story, to tell to make the biggest impact?
Well, Doa's story was a story that has moved readers around the world. It's been translated in something like almost 20 editions. And what readers tell me is that because they could feel really moved by the story of a Syrian teenager, they could somehow relate. She was part of the uprising in Dara. She fled with her family. She fell in love while she was in exile. Her boyfriend convinced her to take one of these awful smuggler boats across the Mediterranean Sea, even though he knew and she knew how dangerous it was. And then the boat sank. And then 500 fellow refugees died around her and drowned, even the love of her life, her fiancé. And when she was rescued, after 4 days and 4 nights on the water in the Mediterranean Sea, surviving on this child's floating ring, she had 2 babies on her chest who weren't her own, who had been entrusted to her by dying relatives. And one of those babies pulled through, and so did Doa. And the book is called A Hope More Powerful Than the Sea, because this is universal. Hope is universal. Resilience is universal. The survival against all odds are the stories that captivate us. And her story is a universal refugee story, but it does allow you to feel some hope and some agency and some desire to want to help other refugees once you've read it. So that's why.
For this story, how for the others you heard, who knows what's the number of the stories you heard of all the people in need, people in terrible conditions. Why you choose, like how can you choose only that specific one story, based on what?
Well, if you can, because there isn't of course I can't tell all the stories, but I can direct my colleagues to use this model. And we have communications colleagues working all over the world, in Afghanistan, probably at the scene of the earthquake right now, in Gaza, who are starving themselves, our colleagues who are still there trying to help save the lives of other people, trying to get into besieged parts of Sudan. If they are able to come out and communicate, I always try to find an individual story that will capture and represent what you're seeing right now. It can only be one, but please don't, it's hard because it feels so hopeless and overwhelming, but there are always stories. It's incredible, the resilience of a human being in the face of grave danger. You think yourself you could never survive it, but many do. And many help others, and then they manage to get through. So let's find those stories and humanize tragedy, because that's the only way other people can feel.
You're not only sharing hard stories of the people in need, but also stories of those UN workers helping other people and improving our world. You share them in your podcast, Awake at Night. Can you tell me which episode left the deepest impression in you and why?
Yeah, I chose to do this podcast called Awake at Night, which is different than a kind of normal institutional podcast. So I got the feeling that a lot of people just see the UN as some big, giant institution, faceless, and kind of unknown. So I thought the way you could get to understand the United Nations is through the people who serve there. And so I do interviews with my colleagues who are working all over the world and who have dedicated their lives in the service of others, sometimes putting their lives in grave danger. But this, I think, one of the episodes that's really moved me a lot, and that we now just highlighted again on World Humanitarian Day on August 19th, is that of Laura Dolci. She's a long-serving United Nations worker. She's now with the UN Human Rights, and way back in the 90s, she met her husband in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Both of them were serving during the war, and they fell in love. And then she got pregnant, and as she was about to give birth, her husband was called to go to Baghdad, and unfortunately. He was in the explosion that blew up the hotel that was housing so many UN workers. And she so compellingly talks about their love story, how a series of just kind of unfortunate events, because he was so good, they needed him for this mission, and yet he didn't make it home, but how she continues to believe in the cause and the purpose of the United Nations, and in his name, and on behalf of her son, she continues to fight for the principles, the UN Charter, and for the safety and the security of humanitarian workers who are risking their lives to help others.
What keeps you awake at night?
Oh, a lot. What keeps me most awake at night is that there are places where the UN has the food, has the medicine, and has the staff that could be saving lives just across a border, for example, in Gaza or in Sudan, and where our access is denied. And it's so frustrating because we know that we could help. It would be so easy to help, and that it's obstacles that are being put in our way that are preventing, and people are dying, needlessly dying because of that.
We are here at the University of Dubrovnik at the Faculty of Media and Public Relations. What advice would you give to students and young people who aspire to protect and promote human rights or to build a career in international organizations or global communications?
Well, I would say that that journalism is a very noble profession, and we need strong journalism more than ever in this kind of information environment where unfortunately social media is playing a dominant role. So we need more journalists, and we need investigative journalists who are holding leaders to account and providing the facts about what's happening in our world. If you're choosing a career in communications or PR, I would suggest to please decide to represent an organization that you believe in, because it's not all about money, and we only have one life. So if you're choosing a career where you can make a difference in the world through whatever you're passionate about, and obviously if you chose to study media and communications or journalism, you're passionate about that. So use those talents to further good in our world, and you will benefit, and so will the people around you.
Your job is to communicate, to send messages. If you could send only one message to every single person on the planet, what would it be?
That every single person can make a difference, even if it feels really daunting, all the problems of the world. If everybody thought that there was nothing that they could do and just sat back and felt resigned, nothing would ever happen. There is a famous saying by Margaret Mead that it only takes a few engaged people to change the world. What if we had almost every person in the world doing one thing that would make a difference, whether it is helping your neighbor, whether it's getting involved in climate action, whether it's choosing a career that is going to benefit society. We do have a lot more power within us than we think.
Beautiful message. Thank you so much for your time and for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bila je ovo podtajnica Ujedinjenih naroda za globalne komunikacije Melissa Fleming. U još jednom UNIDU intervjuu s vama je bila Ivana Hladilo. Lijep pozdrav!